This is the story of one of the most extraordinary buildings to have ever graced our planet, the Crystal Castle. I'm your host, and this is Lost Architecture. There were 3 Crystal Castles, but today we're focusing on the third. It was designed by the architect Owen Jones and completed in 1854. It was originally called the Great Conservatory because it was built to house plants at the 1851 Great Exhibition. After the show, they decided to keep it and turn it into a concert hall and a pleasure palace all made out of glass and iron. You couldn't have found a more British thing to do if you tried. When it first opened, it was an instant sensation. People went wild for the way it looked, but also for how different it felt to be inside it. You could hear and see things so clearly through the glass, which people described as pellucid. Light poured in through these great expanses of glass, creating a dazzling spectacle of color that shifted throughout the day as the sun moved higher and lower in the sky. Some said it resembled daylight in the middle of the night. It really sounds like being inside must have been quite an experience. But the public also loved the feeling of openness and airiness that this structure provided. It didn't feel like a stuffy concert hall or prison with high walls. And this openness was not only a visual experience, but a sensory one too. The Crystal Palace had heating and ventilation systems installed that circulated fresh air throughout the building. So in the summer, it actually felt cooler inside than it did outside. So this is all wonderful. But why does any of it matter? Why should you care about this building? Well, this is a building that pushed the boundaries of what could be done with glass and iron. This is a building that helped to define the Victorian period like no other. This is a building that gave us the confidence to think bigger and push the boundaries even further. In short, this is a building that we should still be marveling at today. But sadly, we can't. You see, the Crystal Palace suffered 3 major fires during its lifetime. The last one occurred in 1936 and it pretty much destroyed the whole thing. Today, nothing remains of it. The site is occupied by a rather uninspiring bus garage and some office blocks. So why did it burn down? Well, there are 2 main theories. The first one has to do with a cigarette. There was an evening concert at the Crystal Palace on November 1936. At around 11:30 p.m., just as the crowds were leaving, someone flicked a lit cigarette butt onto the floor. It landed on some dried leaves, which then caught fire. That's theory number 1. Theory number 2 is a little more complicated. The second theory blames faulty electrical wiring. See, the Crystal Palace had been neglected for years prior to this. No money had been spent on maintenance, so everything was starting to fall apart. And since the Second World War was raging outside, no one was allowed to enter the building after dark. This meant that no one was looking after the place. Lights were left on all night, left to flicker erratically and dangerously in near darkness. On November, this electrical wiring must have started to spark. Some dry leaves fell onto them and the fire took hold. Now, while this is an interesting story and makes for a good explanation, I'm not sure it's true. You see, Owen Jones designed this building to be demolished. He always intended for it to be a temporary structure, so why would he bother installing electrics? Not to mention that even if there were electrics, why would they have been turned on all night? And if someone did leave a cigarette butt lying around, surely it wouldn't spread so quickly. I mean, it's not like this building was known for its fire safety. The Crystal Palace had no fire breaks within its structure. Everything was open plan. If a fire did break out, it could spread from room to room undetected. Even worse, the floors were made of wood, and the whole thing was filled with highly flammable material, like the furniture in here and all of these drapes. What? This doesn't sound very safe. Okay, so let's go back to theory number 1. A careless smoker caused this disaster. And sure, this might not have been the only cause, but I think it's possible that a single lit cigarette was enough. Remember, the Crystal Palace was constructed out of iron and glass. These materials don't burn. If the fire started in a room like this one, the flames would have been quickly extinguished by the roof's water pipes. Once they reached the glass, they would have struggled to go any further. In fact, the walls and roof survived the fire and were taken down afterwards for reuse elsewhere. The only thing that burned here was everything inside. So when people started to put out the flames, they simply smashed the glass to get at the fire below. This image shows the firefighters struggling to do just that. They're using hammers to break through the glass so they can tackle the fire head-on. Some viewers have interpreted this image as the demise of the Crystal Palace, but I don't think that's right. It's true that many of the panes had already been shattered by this point, but there was still a lot of glass standing. The fire was serious, but it wasn't yet the end of the building. The Crystal Palace was saved in this image because the fire was contained within a single room. But that wouldn't always be the case. Sometimes the flames would spread. For example, this photo shows the damage caused by a fire in December 1856. Someone threw a red-hot musket ball into the building and then fled. Luckily, the audience were able to extinguish the flames before it got out of hand. But the damage was still considerable. Those wooden floors helped the fire spread outwards and downwards. All of these images are fascinating because they capture a very important moment in history. Up until this point, it was normal for buildings to be made out of masonry, brick, or stone. This created strong, durable structures, but they were expensive to build and time-consuming. The Crystal Palace challenged this idea. It proved that you could construct a large and impressive building out of cheaper materials. In fact, it cost just $10,000 to build, the modern equivalent of about $1 million. It opened up the possibility for more affordable housing. It gave us shopping arcades, department stores, train stations, and exhibition halls, all constructed out of iron and glass. It also kick-started the careers of some very famous architects, including William Morris and Hector, who both started their careers working at the Crystal Palace. By 1862, the structure had been taken down and rebuilt in South London. It was now on a permanent site and was to be the new home of the Crystal Palace Company. This company organized sporting events, concerts, fireworks displays, you name it. Sadly, the Crystal Palace burnt down again in 1866. Only half the building was destroyed, but the damage was extensive enough to close it down for good. In 1873, the company was declared insolvent. Everyone was arguing over who was to blame, and no one wanted to take it off their hands. It was then that George Shillabeer stepped in. Now, you may not have heard of him, but his contribution to architecture is significant. He owned the London and North Western Railway, which ran train lines all across England. He bought the Crystal Palace for just $100 and set about rebuilding it. His vision was to create a transport hub, a railway terminus, and to do this he employed the architect Owen Jones once more. Together, they created this hybrid structure that combined a railway station with a concert hall. Trains would arrive from the north and the south, and passengers would spill out onto this concourse here. From here, they could take a connecting train to the east or the west, or they could visit the gardens, take a ride on the lake, or enjoy a spot of fishing. George wanted to create an experience, a destination. That sounds nice, but it was also a smart business move. Before this, rail companies charged passengers for every mile they traveled. But if Shillabeer could convince people to spend more time on his network, then he could charge them a flat fare to travel anywhere in the country. So naturally, he included lots of cafes and shops, places where people could spend money. And that's exactly what happened. The new Crystal Palace was an instant success. Over 1 million visitors came to admire the grand halls and vast gardens. The old building had been quirky and charming, but this new iteration was something else. It was grandiose and imposing. It consisted of an elaborate series of arched vaults and domes, all covered in intricate cast ironwork. Each of the arches were unique. No two were alike, and there were over 3,000 of them. Then there were the fountains, the ornate gates, the balustrade, the statues, each one intricately designed. The interior wasn't quite as impressive, but it was still ahead of its time. The Great Hall boasted vaulted ceilings and far more glass. The roof was now entirely composed of glass panes, creating a truly magical experience. You could literally watch the clouds drift by overhead. Then there was the Lake Palace, a picturesque restaurant that sat out in the lake. You could dine in the middle of the lake, surrounded by lush vegetation and cascading waterfalls. It really sounded like a magical place. The company flourished under Schillerbeer's management. For the first time, they began making money. But tragedy struck in 1899 when George passed away. His sons took over the business, but they lacked their father's vision. To make matters worse, London was changing. New entertainment options were becoming available, such as picture houses and dance halls. Gardens were falling out of fashion. By the early 1900s, fewer people were visiting. The Crystal Palace was now seen as old-fashioned. On top of that, the railways were expanding beyond London. New stations were popping up in unexpected places, meaning that passengers no longer needed to pass through this hub. By 1917, passenger numbers had fallen by a third. In July of 1929, the directors made a decision. They would demolish the building and sell off the land. The company would dissolve and everyone would go their separate ways. But before that, they planned a demolition exhibition. People were invited to come and see the building for one last time, to reminisce about all the great memories they'd made here. It was almost like a funeral for the building. Many architects felt compelled to pay their respects. One of them was Bertold Lubetkin, a Russian architect living in London. He would later design the Penguin Pool at London Zoo, as well as several modernist masterpieces. But on this occasion, he was paying tribute to the past. With a friend, he visited the site one last time and stood in awe of the decaying grandeur. It was at this moment that he made a sketch that he titled Crystal Palace, a monument. In this drawing, he reimagines the Crystal Palace as a ruin. Ivy grows out of its arches. Vines crawl up its columns. Trees sprout from its foundations. Nature is reclaiming what is rightfully hers. He wasn't the only one with this idea. Later that year, the demolition was halted because of a recession. No one wanted to buy the land, so it remained there derelict and empty. The architects Charles Holden and John D. Woodhouse were commissioned to photograph the site. Their images are haunting. The light pours through the dilapidated roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. Through gaps in the wall, we see the busy road and the encroaching suburbia. We catch glimpses of people walking past, seemingly oblivious to what lies ahead. Eventually, the company was liquidated, and the Crystal Palace was sold off in pieces. Much of the ironwork was sold to shipbreakers who melted it down for scrap. Some of the glass ended up in cathedrals, mostly in the East End. Most of it, however, was lost forever. By 1936, nothing remained. All that stood in its place was a car park and a bus garage. During the Second World War, bombs fell and the site was heavily damaged. It was then that the developers took advantage and proposed a new plan for the area. They wanted to redevelop the site and turn it into a bus station. Permission was granted, and work soon began. When it opened in 1937, it was the largest bus station in London. This is it today. Not much has changed. The same buses pull in and out every day. The same people wait on the same platforms. But it's hard to imagine that anything ever stood here at all. And that's the real tragedy of the Crystal Palace. Today, no trace remains. And without photographs and drawings, we might not even remember it. So I'll ask you, what do you find most fascinating about this building? Let me know in the comments below. And on that note, this has been Lost Architecture. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.